Friends from the Field webinar. And we've been doing this series since last April, about every single Thursday from 4 to 5 p.m. With a different naturalist topic each week. And it's a collaboration between Blue Hill Heritage Trust, where I work, where I'm the outreach coordinator, and Island Heritage Trust, where Jake works, and where Martha works, where many other wonderful people work. And so this week we're super excited to have Michael and Rebecca with us. And I think now that they've hopped on, I may just check in with them quickly to see if, do you guys want to share your screen to get it started right away, or where are you at? Would you like me to do introductions first for you?
We can start, yeah, go ahead, introduce us. We don't get to do that very often, so why not?
Okay, awesome, wonderful. So this is a talk called Upwest and Downeast, Meandering the Maine Coast by Sea Kayak. And Michael and Rebecca in 2017 took the summer off from their jobs as sea kayak guides to live out of their kayaks along the coast of Maine for almost 2 months, starting from Deer Isle, if you know where that is, and twice paddling the stretch of coast between Portland and Canada, which is quite a ways if you know that area. Their experience is documented in a new book, which Michael is going to be reading from today, that he and Rebecca wrote. And Rebecca will be sharing with us some of her process of painting and drawing on the islands on their journey, and turning those arts into prints. And for the question and answer, Rebecca and Michael are happy to answer anything you've ever wanted to know about kayaking, but we're afraid to ask. So thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to you two.
Great, thanks a lot. We want to talk a little about the trip, just some generalities, or should I just start reading?
Sure.
Sure? Okay, yeah, I think that was a good intro, so I'm going to leap right into the beginning of the book. And so we started right here in Deer Isle. Oh, I should say that right now we're in Stonington. This is where we live now. We're in Rebecca's studio space right here, and these are all prints from the that she's done after the trip. And the book it's a collaboration. I'll just show you what the beginning of it looks like. This is just a proof, and so we've got some of these prints interspersed with what I wrote about the trip. And it's just been a process that's taken a couple of years to get it to where it is now. It's now out on Kindle, but we're working on getting the print version available. So the first chapter is called Greenlaw Cove. Standing calf deep in the water, I straddled the cockpit and dropped into the seat, pushing off from shore. The muddy bottom lay only inches beneath my hull, but I was finally floating. A few feet away, Rebecca did the same. I pulled my legs inside and pressed my feet against the foot pegs. Deborah stood on the lawn below the cabin, watching us. It seemed a minor miracle that we made it this far, that we were finally launching, and a dim nugget of worry still lurked at the edge of my thoughts. Something could still get in the way of our trip, some overlooked detail, a forgotten bill, or a last-minute call with bad news. So I focused on my actions, stretching the elastic rim of the spray skirt around the cockpit combing, tight as a drumhead. I took a couple of shallow reverse strokes, coasting into deeper water, and pivoted the boat away from shore. The kayak felt weighty, sluggish, low in the water with the weight it carried. It was a poor time to be setting out on a trip. The cove lay beneath a dense layer of fog, the water surface speckled with raindrops, and it was nearly dark, the wind in our faces. The overnight forecast called for 30-knot gusts. We told ourselves countless times not to begin a trip this way, the deck stacked against us, but we were floating. We were on the water, finally set free from the shore with the summer ahead of us. Rebecca and I shared a glance, and she nodded. We looked over our shoulders. The cabin was already half swallowed in fog. Deborah, a small woman with long gray hair and a braid, stood on the lawn below it, holding her phone up for a photo. We shouted our thanks and began paddling. Like any journey beginning with a single step, ours began with a single self-consciously intentional paddle stroke, but the cabin fell quickly into place. But the next fell quickly into place, soon attaining a familiar rhythm. The cabin dissolved behind us into the gloom. Ahead in the dusk, fog lay so thick that we couldn't see the island we gazed at all winter. but we soon turned away from the shore, took a bearing on our compasses, and headed into the whiteness. We had watched the cove through the seasons. I guess this should be. We had watched the cove through the seasons, the late autumn duck hunters in camouflage skiffs, and later the massive ice slabs heaped upon the shores. When the cove froze, we put on snowshoes and walked across it. In milder weather, we donned our dry suits and, launching from the shore below the cabin, paddled our kayaks out along Stinson Neck or into the east end of Eggemogan Reach. If we paused on one of the islands, we kept our breaks short to prevent getting chilled. We gazed at our surroundings those winter months and commented that while it was nice, it would probably be really nice in the summer. It was a joke that had begun as an obvious observation when we paddled during winter months. We'd lived in Maine for nearly 15 years, and yet our summers, those warm, idyllic months that drew most visitors to our coast, were consumed by work, entertaining in some form or another those summer visitors. Often, over the last 9 months, we'd been content to merely look at this borrowed view, a cove sheltered by meandering peninsulas and wooded islands, beyond which rose the low mountains of Mount Desert Island. It gave us a sense our fortunes were good. It was easier somehow to be satisfied when you had a view of the ocean. Even if you were in an out-of-the-way nook, the changing tides were a constant reminder of the world beyond, the places where the water went when the tide receded, or from whence it came when it rose. Living by the water made it easier to be content with staying put. Why go anywhere else? It was a little view of the action, maybe just enough to feel like you're not missing much in the rest of the world, at least for a little while. Of course, we were house sitting, so we had to leave when the owners returned for the summer. A house has a way of exerting its hold upon you, though, and the longer you stay, the more comfortable you become. You unpack and get settled, acquiring belongings and growing accustomed to the quirks of the place or the way the cove looks with the sunrise as you drink your morning coffee. You tell yourself every day that it's only temporary. We did. We were always telling ourselves these past couple of years that every aspect of our lives was temporary. We had been cleaning the house for days. We'd wake up every morning thinking this might be our last time waking in this bed, that maybe, finally, we'd get our kayaks packed, get the last of our stuff out of the house, and wipe our tracks behind us as we stepped out the door the last time. We'd made trips to the dump and then final dump runs and then additional final dump runs when we created more garbage by staying just a little longer in order to clean the house more. We took final showers and wiped clean the drain, making sure there were no fingerprints on the chrome shower handle. Every time we used the stove or the toaster, we had to clean. We had to leave the house cleaner than we'd found it. The floor was scoured and swept again. We returned the owner's canned goods to the shelves, trying to remember how they'd been arranged. For weeks, we tried to winnow our belongings to what would go in the kayaks with us, moving the rest to Rebecca's studio, a space in the basement of the old school building in Stonington. She'd obsessed over what art materials to bring, finally fitting them into the dry bag the size of a toaster oven that dominated her kayak's stern hatch. Finally, that afternoon, the first day of July, we piled the gear around our boats on the lawn. It took hours to figure out how to pack it all, but there was always a piece or two that didn't fit. We almost had it all figured out when Deborah arrived. We helped her unload her Subaru, carrying her belongings into the house we just vacated. We showed her the work that had been done and the new alarm system, and this all probably took another hour as the high tide shrunk away from our heavy loaded boats amid the thickening fog. It began to rain. Deborah suggested we spend the night, and it would have been easy to stay, smarter really, but our departure had been delayed too many times. We were ready to go. From out of the fog came the shape of the island, vague at first, so we weren't even sure it was there, then definite, familiar. We followed the shore to the campsite, a 20-minute paddle for the first day of our journey. It began to rain harder, so we quickly unloaded the tent and set it up amid the trees on the point. And though it seemed a lot of work, especially with the rain beginning, we dug out our cooking gear and heated a packet of pre-cooked Indian food and a packet of pre-cooked rice and ate quickly. The campsite was somewhat sheltered until the wind shifted to the southwest, bending the hissing treetops above, and the rain became a downpour. Then the tent bore the brunt of the gust from the side, morphing into a misshapen blob. Because it was difficult for us both to be in the two-person tent, blowing up air mattresses and unstuffing sleeping bags, Rebecca went in first, while I tied additional guy lines to strengthen the pitch and keep the fly from blowing against the inner mesh. The fog dispersed, revealing the lights of houses on nearby shores, including the cabin where we'd house sat for the winter, brightly lit, as if to remind us of the comfort we'd left. By the time I climbed inside, the interior felt damp and the wind flattened the vestibule on one side. The night had the potential to be a long one. But as I climbed into my sleeping bag, I felt an immense sense of relief. It was a good sleeping bag, warmer than I needed, filled with treated, water-resistant down, floating upon a comfortable air mattress inside a tent that had served me well through other storms, and which I'd now taken the extra steps of further battening down. We might have had a long night ahead of us, but we were ready for it, and tired enough to sleep through a storm. I listened to the taut fly rustling like a well-trimmed sail, aware of Rebecca beside me doing the same, and hope she felt content as I did. So that's part of the first chapter, and I think should we talk a little bit about the process before we go on to a little bit more? Is that our plan?
Sure.
We have a really kind of a loose plan here, basically because we've been really busy lately, and we thought now we might talk a bit about just the general logistics of the trip, how it worked, how we got ready.
I think one thing about this trip was that a lot of people like to take expeditions. We never called this an expedition. This was our summer vacation. We wanted it to be a very relaxed trip. I would almost say that we did very little planning for it, except for the fact that Michael's written a guidebook about the coast of Maine, and so he's really spent 3 years researching. So he had ideas of places that he liked and wanted to go back to. He also had ideas about places that he hadn't been to and he wanted to see. Otherwise, generally we had about sort of a vague plan that we were going to go towards Portland, then we were going to come back towards Canada, and then back to Deer Isle. And most of the time we knew about 3 or 4 days ahead where we might be. So we were kind of navigating and planning as we went, and based on the weather and things that we wanted to see was kind of how we did the planning. So we didn't spend a lot of time. We didn't have a schedule. A couple of times we met some people that we had a schedule to meet them, but otherwise we were sort of cruising the coast. And when we needed water, we would have to find a town that had water. If we needed food, we'd have to find a town for food.
Yeah, so cruising is a good comparison. So a little bit more like the way people live out of sailboats than the way people usually do like a kayaking expedition where they have everything with them. We were very dependent upon going into towns along the way to get everything we needed. And that was part of the fun. In some ways, part of the idea of this trip was just to go live out on the islands for the summer, just because we really liked being in those places. And even if you didn't put in a lot of miles between all the islands that you go to, it would be great being out there. So it was just an excuse to kind of live this other way. Should I go on now and read a little more?
Sure.
Okay.
Michael, before you go on, could you both, either of you, just introduce the title of your book, please? A couple of people were asking, and I thought it would be lovely to have it come from your words.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
It's called Upwest. Oh, wait, this is backwards. No wonder I look so strange. It's called Upwest and Downeast, Meandering the Maine Coast by Sea Kayak. And that's actually a really good question, because right there, Upwest is a word that I made up, and a lot of people don't get that. A lot of people don't understand Downeast. So Downeast, if you don't know, came from the days when schooners were coming up the coast from Boston, and they were sailing downwind and east. So they started saying Downeast. So you hear that used a lot, and now that means both a direction of travel and a place. I tend to think of Downeast as anywhere that's further east of Mount Desert Island. Some people just think of Maine as Downeast. But so for us, the opposite of that would be up west. So we started off our trip going toward Portland. So we were going against the wind mostly. So we're going upwind and west. So up west and down east. And I think we have a long history of naming things in ways that people really don't get. Like our gallery before that we had was Rebecca's kicking me. But anyway, so far, yeah, Upwest and Downeast draws a lot of just puzzle books. I think it makes sense. I like it. But any other questions I should get to before continuing on?
No, Michael, that was great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to skip ahead about 2 weeks here, and this is we're down in the Sheepscot River on an island called Spectacle Island, and it's just one particular morning. In the morning, I sat in my hammock, bundled in my down jacket beneath a raincoat. It was July 13th, a Thursday. The sky had begun to spit diagonal wind-driven drops that made the ink in my notebook run, so instead I took out the chart. We had decided to get to Perkins Island in the Kennebec River. As the crow flies, the island was only 6.5 nautical miles from where we'd camped on Spectacle, but Georgetown Island was in the way. Gazing down at the chart, it took some effort to mentally untangle the web of waterways and islands. It was tough to even tell that Georgetown was an island, but a convoluted network of tidal rivers constantly flooded or ebbed around the 8-mile-long landmass, connected by bridge to Aroostook Island, which in turn was bridged to Woolwich. This whole area was a maze of tidal rivers which required some planning to get through, but no matter how much you planned, odds were you would paddle against the current at some point. We launched by 9:30, an hour after low tide, carrying everything down to the mud, and as we made our way across the Sheepscot, we let the northeast wind push us. It also pushed against the incoming current, resulting in steep, sloppy waves that we drove our bows over, splashing into the troughs between them, trying to stay on a heading that took us generally toward the village of Five Islands. Rebecca let out an involuntary whoop, and I looked at her as a slap of cold water hit my face. Rebecca laughed, and despite the current against us, the wind moved us along quickly. The village of Five Islands, often referred to in superlatives regarding its postcard cuteness, was quiet that morning. We wove through the islands the village was named for, a couple of which are settled with Victorian cottages and connected to each other by a small bridge, which we passed beneath on the backs of small waves.
Michael.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We just had somebody on the chat box wondering if you could speak just a little bit slower. I think their internet connection might be a challenge, and they want to hear what you're saying, and it's just difficult for them.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. The village of Five Islands. No. The village of Five Islands, often referred to in superlatives regarding its postcard cuteness, was quiet that morning. We wove through the islands the village was named for, a couple of which are settled with Victorian cottages and connected to each other by a small bridge, which we passed beneath on the backs of small waves. The rain came down, steady and cold. At Reed State Park, we passed beneath the rocky bluff of Griffith Head, where a couple of coin-operated binoculars stood like massive silver viewmasters anchored atop swiveling iron stands pointing seaward. A few intrepid visitors were afoot up there, hunkered beneath raincoats. Nearly 2 weeks into our trip, despite our proximity to towns, we encountered few other people on the water. A lobster boat usually worked in the distance, and it was odd how you could be paddling on a wide stretch of sea and still find yourself near enough to a lobster boat that it took some effort to avoid a collision. But it surprised us how little contact with others we had as we paddled into the more populated part of the coast. It felt we were in our own world, parallel to the one on shore, but quite separate. Up on the bluff, the wet travelers pointed the tower viewer toward us. I thought of how nice it could be, driving along a coast and checking out the trails, the beaches, and dropping a quarter into the slot to discover this magnified view. I imagined the snapshots before retreating to the warm car, blasting the heater, dry cotton clothes and the stereo, the snacks and hot coffee. But there we were, on the other side of the shoreline, wet, a little chilled. Most of the time I saw tourists and pitied them, their lack of immersion. But right then, I would have liked a little less immersion, to be the one looking out through those lenses rather than the object of their focus. So I think I'll skip ahead to probably another week after that. And this is the beginning of a chapter called Strawberry Creek Island. Strawberry Creek Island is It's right next to Sebaskadigan Island, up Harpswell Sound. The tent zipper, as the slider moved along, unclasping one row of teeth from the other, made a familiar sound that had somehow evolved, at least in my mind, to resemble the opening notes of a tune that would then play in my head, off and on, all day long. I don't know how the rasp of zipper teeth can take on the nuances of multiple bows drawn over multiple violins, but that's what it did. The beginning of a rising melody that became an orchestral disco masterpiece. I unzipped the vestibule, the violins soared, and my day began. After the violins came the steady beat. It was perhaps fortunate that the tune had no lyrics. Words might have driven me nuts, or I might have felt inclined to sing them, which would have driven Rebecca nuts. But they might have provided a clue to the name of the tune or who had created it, and it might have relieved my imagination from the burden of recreating it. But my imagination was doing pretty well without any help. I wasn't sure if it was the theme song for a TV show like Love Boat. I suspected it wasn't the Love Boat theme, but just the same, I began imagining parts of my day like the beginning of a TV show, the aerial footage that, instead of a cruise ship, would feature us, paddles synchronized to the beat, intercut with shots of us acting natural, with glowing smiles for the camera as the credits rolled. Rebecca, the cruise director, Michael, the lovable goof, playing the purser with some sort of rodential nickname. We were headed down east finally, and aside from the new tune, it felt different. For one thing, the coast would now be on our left. The day before, we'd caught the current Harpswell Sound that carried us inland to this tiny island in a cove near the mouth of Strawberry Creek. We'd watched storms pass north and south as daylight faded and cocktail laughter came from somewhere on shore. Now the stormy weather had passed and the morning had dawned clear and calm, songbirds chirping in the trees, the hum of cars crossing the nearby bridge now more distinct. And I imagined their drivers, first thing on a Friday morning, driving to work, perhaps glancing down the creek to see a couple of kayaks perched on a ledge beside the little island. We didn't launch until nearly high tide. It made it easy to move our boats the foot or two down the ledge to the water, but meant we'd need to paddle nonstop, hurrying to avoid the current turning against us. The Gurnet, a narrows where a bridge crossed over to Sebaskadigan Island, would develop the sort of flow with whitewater potential that we'd be unable to paddle against. So we made our way up the river quickly. The disco anthem loud in my mind, and once through the Gurnet, relaxed for the last few miles along the New Meadows River. So, do we want to talk about a couple more topics, Rebecca? Do you want to sit here where people can see you? So we have a few other topics we thought we might talk about, like maybe you said the boats, planning, navigation, Maine Island Trail Association, just basically how we got by. We can probably answer a lot of this in the Q&A too if people are interested in it. But Rebecca paddled your boat's 18 feet long?
17 and a half.
Okay, 17 and a half foot long pygmy coho, which she built one winter. And I paddled a fiberglass boat, just a boat that I bought called a P&H Cetus. And they're both pretty big boats that allow us to carry a fair amount of gear, and they're fairly fast. And we're able to carry usually water up to maybe 5 to 7 days with us. It's a gallon per person per day. And we'd have a lot of groceries, but the fresh groceries only lasted for a few days. So that's why we were always looking for a store wherever we went to try to get whatever they had. As far as, I guess maybe we should say something about the Maine Island Trail Association. It's the nation's oldest waterway. It's basically a network of access points that stretch all the way from New Hampshire to the Canadian border. There's over 200 campsites. It's on a mixture of state-owned land that's part of land trusts, and other organizations, as well as private land that landowners share with people who use the trail. And it's part of what makes this whole thing possible. It's also what makes Maine really a great place for paddlers, aside from just all the the public access that we have because of land trusts. So you can look at the Maine Island Trail Guide, and you can plan a trip along the coast.
A lot of people, when they hear that it's a trail, they think that you go from one island to the next, but it's really just a whole bunch of different islands. So you plan your own trail. So
yeah. So it's not like, the idea was that it's a little bit like the Appalachian Trail, and people like that idea that you get on a trail and you go, but of course it's the ocean, and there's no dotted lines that we can see. So you're figuring it out as you go along. And a lot of that has to do with the weather. I mean, every day that we go out there, we have a loose plan, but it's always subject to change depending on the weather and what we want to do. And then a few things that are maybe worth mentioning also. We try to follow leave no trace principles while we're camping. So the entire almost 2 months that we took this trip, we didn't have any campfires. We never felt like we needed one. We always used a camp stove. That meant carrying enough fuel that, we'd have a few weeks of fuel with us most of the time. And if people want to know about pooping, we'll talk about that later. Yeah, I think that's probably enough of logistical stuff for now. Is there any other question that's coming in from you guys, or should I go on?
Let's see, I can check the chat box for you. I think we did have a question from Lori. What did you do if you planned to camp on an island and found all campsites were full when you had arrived?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That actually didn't happen very much because we really didn't see a lot of people most of the time we were out there.
a few times.
Yeah, so when we got to Casco Bay and we got to Jewel Island, that was one of the first places where the first campsites we saw were taken, and we just went on and found more. Another place where that happened was when we returned to the area in the Sheepscot River. It was a Saturday night in the middle of July, and it was pretty busy. And we were fortunate enough to find like probably the last campsite there. But aside from that, you always have a backup plan.
Yeah. So one of the things that we decided on before we left was that we would really try not to arrive late to campsites, and which is kind of our nature. We often will do that, when we're camping locally. But that way it would give us time to be able to move on to another place. So a few times that we did find people at the sites that we were hoping to get to, we would just paddle on to and have an alternate site. We did occasionally have times where we were already in a site and somebody else would paddle up. And usually most of the sites have a limit to how many people are in there. Sometimes it's based on the actual like ground area. We always recognize with other people coming up, especially if they're arriving late, they might not be able to get to another site. And so we would always tell people that they're welcome to join us in our site. And most of the time, it's not what they really want to do, and they would go on and try and find another site. So
there was one island where we arrived at the exact same time as another group, and I actually I saw this paddler out of the corner of my eye as we were approaching the island, and I pretended that I didn't see him, and I kept paddling until I was undisputedly the first one there, and he kind of backed off, and then of course it turned out that we knew him, and I felt kind of bad, and we said, well, we'll share the island with you, but it really wasn't quite big enough, and they were very gracious. They maybe hadn't come as far as we had that day, but we were all kind of hoping to be there, and they went on to the next island. And we felt kind of bad, but they were pretty nice about it. But we always feel like we're ready to share the island with anybody else who comes along, because it can be pretty difficult to go on if they arrive at dusk or something. And sometimes the people you meet out there that's part of the fun. So hopefully. Enough on that?
yeah.
All right.
So I do have some images to share. We didn't practice this, getting it but I can try and do that now.
Okay.
So hopefully this will work. think I'm logged in as an attendee, and you won't allow screen sharing.
Let's see, try again.
We're actually kind of getting close to, oh,
No, it won't allow me to do it.
Let me see. So it says you are currently a panelist. I can change your role to attendee, but not to panelist.
Okay. Let me just try one more time.
so this is pretty low tech. We could just stick with it.
Well,
Maybe while Rebecca is trying to get her photos up, if people have questions, I know that the part of this presentation was to ask any of your kayaking questions under the sun that you might have. So please feel free to put those in the chat box or to raise your little blue hand, the little blue feature, and we can unmute you to ask those questions yourself. And we could just do a little mix of question and answer right now. And then if the images come up, Rebecca can share those as well.
okay. Sorry.
You know,
Yeah, this might not work.
you don't want to leave the meeting.
Hello?
Hey, we can still see you. You're still there.
Okay.
There we go.
So we do have a question in the chat box if you'd like to take it.
Okay.
What is your favorite paddle out of Stonington? We will be there later this month and would like some advice.
Are they staying over, are they camping overnight or just a day paddle?
It's a good question. Maybe
The answer is yes.
Harry says day paddle.
How about Gooseberry Island? I think that's a pretty good one.
It's fairly far out, so it would be a full day paddle for most people.
Let's make 3.5, 4 miles from the Stonington ramp. Yeah, Gooseberry is an awesome spot. I think of it as there's so many glacial erratic boulders. It's a little bit like somebody just took these boulders and sprinkled them all over the island. And at high tide, there's a nice little sandy beach there that kind of faces Jericho Bay and the open ocean. So there's a little bit of swell and it feels kind of out there. And it's also a small enough island to walk around in about 15 minutes, which is kind of nice. And not only that, if you don't get all the way out there, then there's a few nice places along the way as well, like Wreck Island and Round and McGlathery. You could stop at those as well. So you can go from Stonington and follow basically just a line of islands right out to Gooseberry. And then on your way back, you could stop at maybe a little camp for a view from the top up there, which is really pretty. And then maybe stop over at Green Island for a dip in the freshwater pond it's an old quarry, and rinse off before you go into town.
Thank you. That's great. We have a few more questions coming in if you would like to take them now, or if you'd like to wait and read a little more. What is best for you?
Let's take some questions.
Okay. So we have one. Did you visit State Park Island off from Islesboro?
Warren Island, no, we didn't go up north into Penobscot Bay. We just went on our way up west. We went through the Fox Island thoroughfare and camped around the Fox Islands, and then over to Muscle Ridge from there. And on our way back, we just went around the south end of Vinyl Haven and over to Isle of Hope.
Awesome. Thank you. And then there's a question here from Marcia, and it's actually a question that's a little bit on my mind as well, because I am not a very competent paddler yet. What are some of the more important safety practices or gear that you recommend?
You want to? Safety practices. Definitely, everybody needs to learn how to do capsize recovery or rescues. It's enough that somebody in your group understands how to do that if you're paddling with a group. So to be able to rescue somebody else who's tipped over, or to be rescued yourself, And then if you're paddling alone, and also really just everybody, if you do it for a while, it's a good idea to learn how to do a self-rescue as well, because everybody can tip over at the same time. So I think that's one of the really important things. And I'd say another really important thing is navigation, because a lot of people go out here and really don't know where they are, and the fog could roll in at any time. And it's not really very hard to get some basic sense of how to navigate. And I guess I would kind of include, along with navigation, lobster boat awareness and other boat awareness. But for instance, off of Stonington, there are a lot of channels that aren't necessarily obvious, and to understand where those are, where the lobster boats are going to go, and to stay out of their way. And I suppose the other thing that goes with that is understanding that kayaks do not have the right of way, and that it's our responsibility to stay out of everybody else's way. That's one part of it.
As far as like gear goes, you know, we always wear a life jacket all the time. And then having, you know, just all the basic signaling devices that you should have. One of the things we were always concerned about, because the water is cold, is hypothermia. And it's a pretty obvious way to get hypothermia by being immersed in the water, but less obvious when you feel like you're warm, but you're getting slightly chilled as you're paddling and the day goes on. So that was something we were always aware of, always sort of asking each other, are you feeling warm enough? You know, not going too long without eating, and just being basically aware all the time of your safety. I would say just planning ahead and thinking about all of the things that could go wrong, and doing anything that you can to prevent it before it happens.
Yeah, I think that's, we could go on, but those are some.
We like safety stuff, so we like.
Thank you. That was great. That was super helpful. We have a couple more questions. One of them is, what is your favorite day paddle in Maine?
Our favorite day paddle in Maine. You know, again, I think it's the Stonington Islands. I mean, right here is.
We really like the Gold Coast too.
Well, we really like the Gold Coast too, but I think for most people, well, I like both. I've paddled out here in Stonington quite a bit more, and there's just so much. This is where I learned how to paddle, and it never gets old. It's always new, and there's so many islands, and no matter what the weather is, you can usually find some place to paddle, and there's a lot of public access here. There's a lot of places to get out and have lunch, and yeah, it's awesome. But so yeah, Rebecca mentioned the Gold Coast, and that's definitely another favorite place if we can get out for a day. It's a long drive from here. It's a very challenging place to paddle, but it's awesome. There's big cliffs, and there's big currents, and there's a lot of rocks along the shore, and it feels kind of out there and awesome.
Thank you. Two more questions have come in, and I'm gonna give them to you both at once. One of them is, do you have any interactions with marine animals along your paddles? And then also tell us about what food you eat while you're out there. So two very different questions, but both super interesting, I think.
I think it's your turn.
Okay, we'll talk about the food. So we do almost all of our, we do all of our own cooking. We hardly ever eat out at restaurants when we're, on a trip like that. Michael actually does, I would say, most of the cooking, partly because that allows me time when we get to an island to do some painting and drawing. So it's a little bit like backpacking food, except that we're not concerned so much about the weight, because we can put a lot of weight in the kayak. So it's more sort of the size of the food. We are basically vegetarian, and I'm gluten-free. So that makes added challenges to your cooking. Unfortunately, I couldn't get that slideshow to play because there's some images of cooking and food in there. But we also use those packets of Indian food quite a bit. and packets of pre-cooked rice. So that's a very easy base. And then we add vegetables to that. We had an Outback oven with us. So every once in a while we would have a treat of warm brownies for dinner.
Pretty often.
Yeah.
Made some casseroles.
Yeah. So that would be it. For breakfast, pretty much we ate oatmeal every single day with extra nuts and coconut and dried fruit and things on it. Lunches, Michael's a big fan of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I would often eat, cheese and crackers, and more kind of snack food for lunch, and then different bars and snacks, nuts and fruit.
Lots of avocados,
lunch.
Lots of sweet potatoes.
A lot of sweet potatoes and avocados. Yeah.
They fit into the very front part of your kayak, and they actually get stuck up there, which is convenient, so that when you're really hungry, you have to put your kayak up on end and shake it and try to get the sweet potatoes out. And it's good to remember to take them out at the end of the season because they don't fare very well over the winter time. What was the other one? Marine mammals or animals? Well, we saw, for about half a second in between Monhegan and Allen Island, we saw a minke whale. And we see lots of seals everywhere. And
of course, lots of eagles and
yeah. Aside from that, actually, not a ton of wildlife.
Are you paddling around now? You've seen the sunfish?
A couple days ago, I saw a couple of molas or ocean sunfish. Saw some river otters pretty recently. But yeah, we don't see a ton of wildlife all the time, but sometimes. Any other questions?
I can talk a little bit about the painting stuff that I brought with me.
Yes, please do, Rebecca. We've had people in the chat box wanting to know more about your art, so that would be great.
So unfortunately, in that little slideshow that I haven't been able to access, there were more images of what I was painting and stuff. But basically, this was my painting kit, which I carried with me in a dry bag. Michael says it's about the size of a toaster.
I guess it's a small toaster.
Yeah. So mostly I consider myself to be an oil painter. And so I do paint out, and on the trip I was doing oil painting. So basically the paint is in a box like this. So I've got the paints in there. And then I made this little paint box many years ago, and this is what I'm actually using most of the time when I'm painting. So all small paintings about that size. And this lifts out. It's all made out of foam core, so it's very lightweight. And the paint fits in there. I have some spaces in there for medium, and then the brushes go here. And I use very minimal cleaning. Just kind of wipe the brushes. If you try to keep them wet, they sort of stay okay. And then when I would have a chance to get near fresh water and soap, then I would do a better cleaning then. So in a kit like this, I was doing paintings. Here's all this. I'll just hold them up. So these are some of the paintings that I was doing when I was out there. There we go.
It's backwards.
Yeah. Well, we often so we didn't have, because we didn't have a set schedule. We would sometimes stay 2 nights on the same island, and most of the time that was because either I loved it so much that I didn't want to go. Most of the time I fell in love with every island that we went to, and I never wanted to leave. So sometimes we would stay 2 days so that I would have more time to work. And then occasionally we would have bad weather days, either because it was anticipated or it was just like very foggy. So there's a few foggy paintings that are kind of like that. Here's a few. Anyway, so they're these kind of small, I would consider these to be basically studies that I'm doing. And I get them started and as finished as much as I can when I'm out there. I also had with me a watercolor set, which was looking like that. It's about that size. A brush that went with that, and then a notebook. And on those, I would mostly do like small studies like this. And these would then basically be the basis for anything I was going to do, in the future. It just kind of gave me some time to look at things, compose them, and a little bit of color. I also had a sketchbook. So I was doing sketching when I was out there. And then those would come back and I would be making the prints with those. So for the illustrations for this book, we decided I was going to do woodcuts or wood engravings. And sort of as practice to figure out how to do them, I started doing linoleum prints, and I really liked the linoleum, and so I just kind of stuck with that. So all of the illustrations for the book, which are some of them up here, are linoleum prints. And those start out as sketches, and then I don't have the stuff here for that. But it's the same process that you do mostly when you're in school, elementary school. You've done a linoleum print with a little cutter, and then the plate is inked and printed. So that's basically that.
Okay. Looks like we're down to about...
Your art is beautiful.
Thanks.
We have a couple of questions about, and forgive me if you went over this already, but we had someone inquire about whether you use acrylics as well as oil.
I don't. I use oil and then water. I don't consider myself a watercolor, painter. Pretty much I'm just doing like drawings and sketches that are colored in with watercolor. So mostly I'm doing oil painting. So
Thanks for the clarification. And what was the surface that you chose to paint on while you were out on the islands?
So most of the time I was using this, this kind of it's called multimedia artboard, and it's kind of like paper, but it's a board. So it's very thin, but stronger than paper. And you can paint on it with oil paint. I do put a primer on it just because I like the surface of that. And then occasionally I would so it takes a while for the oil paint to dry. So then I would carry a little thing like this, and they sit in here, and then the paintings are just taped in. And I can fit 4 of them in there. And so if it takes 4 or 5 days for them to dry, then they can dry like that. So.
I imagine on days like today, they take a little bit longer than they would on a drier, less humid.
Yeah. I try not to put the paint on too thick, but it seems to dry fairly quickly most of the time when I'm out there. Some colors dry faster than others.
Interesting.
It's so inspiring, Rebecca. I love your setup, the boxes that you made, and I just want to go out and do art now out in a kayak. Super inspiring.
Well, I'm always trying to get this kit smaller and smaller, and so since that trip, I think I've gotten a little bit smaller even still. So, yeah.
Well, you guys are such an amazing team. This has been so insightful. I can't wait to get my hands on your book. I know that at the beginning you mentioned that it is available via Kindle. I think you said that.
Yeah, it's available on Kindle now, and hopefully soon the print version will be ready.
Awesome.
The Maine Arts Commission gave us a grant to publish it to print it in state, and so we're working with Maine Authors Publishing to get that finished, and hopefully soon.
So one thing, the Kindle version doesn't have maps, right?
That's true. This one has maps, and I think the Kindle version will eventually have maps, but they just didn't look very good on there. So
we have maps in here like this that kind of shows the route, and then
we like books with maps.
Yeah. Michael loves maps, charts.
Well, as things progress, please keep us in the loop, because the members of our communities are obviously interested because we had a couple of people ask throughout the presentation where they could get their hands on your book. And
well, yeah. So if you look for Upwest and Downeast on Kindle on Amazon, you'll find it. Yeah.
Awesome.
I think at least 2 people have finished reading it so far. So I haven't heard anything really terrible about it. So I think it's good. You know.
Well, I look very forward to reading it myself.
I'd say one of the challenges that you had in writing it was that there weren't any disasters. Like, we tried very hard not to make it like a disaster book. And I think when you read other books about trips like this, they anticipated the disaster, and we really wanted this to be like a fun trip and to inspire other people to take a trip, not to warn them away from doing something like this. And you know, we've spent a lot of time.
You could do this.
So we've spent a lot of time in the last 10 years improving our skills and being comfortable out on the water. So we don't want to downplay the dangers that could exist in going out and doing a trip like this, but you know, there's a lot of fairly safe places to be paddling, and it's pretty awesome. So we wanted to share that with people and sort of inspire them rather than make it sound like we were doing this dangerous expedition. So.
That's so cool. We had another question about, do you still have a studio, and where is it? It looks like you have a studio right in your house, but do you have another place where people come to purchase art or to see?
Yeah, I do. I am in Stonington, and it's a studio that's a working studio, and then a little gallery space. This is the gallery space here.
Nice. Yeah, we can see.
Anyway, and it's on Thurlows Hill Road in Stonington. So as you're going down the hill right into Stonington, it's there. So
it's called the Merchant Row Building, and it's on Seabreeze Avenue, right as you're heading down to the boat ramp.
Yeah.
So when you're done kayaking, just stop by.
I try to be here most days that I'm not. We also are guiding trips and taking people out. So whenever we're not doing that, then the studio's open.
That's awesome. Thank you both so much. This has been super, super interesting. And I know we've had a lot of people who have logged on who can't be in Maine this summer because of COVID and other reasons. And they were just excited to touch base with a place that they love. And hopefully everyone will be able to come and kayak with Michael and Rebecca someday. I'm going to have to go out with you two as well at some point. It's very exciting to hear what you have to share. So yeah, thank you so much. I know that we're at 5 p.m. If there are any last questions in the chat box, we can take those now. And Michael and Rebecca, if you have any last advice or wisdom you want to share with us.
If you want to go paddling with us, our website is upwestanddowneast.com.
Awesome. I can include that in the follow-up email to everyone who has registered. And then just quickly, the name of your gallery is?
Rebecca Daugherty Fine Art.
Okay, Rebecca Daugherty Fine Art. Somebody was asking me to put that in the chat box.
Yep, and Michael also has a blog, which is seakayakstonington.blogspot.com, which has 10 years or more of paddling in this area and other areas. So there's lots of pictures on there, sort of trip reports and information as well.
Thank you so much. If you two wouldn't mind, I tried to like jot it down really fast, but if you wouldn't mind just shooting me an email with the name of your studio and then the blogs, the websites, I can put those also into our follow-up email so people can access them.
Great.
And then somebody said they never talked about pooping. It sounds like somebody would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I knew that was going to come back. And okay, so the islands are very fragile. A lot of people who have gone backpacking and camping in other places are used to digging cat holes and basically going off in the woods like that. But the islands have very shallow soil, and a lot of people are visiting them. So you don't know that, you know, where you're digging a cat hole, somebody else is going to come along and try the same thing, which is pretty unpleasant. So the idea is, it's part of Leave No Trace. We
It all gets carried out.
We carry it out. So we use wag bags. Wag bags are just plastic bags. They're the liner that goes with a portable toilet. And inside of it is a poop abating chemical. And when that comes in contact with the poop, it makes it smell a little bit less bad and helps it break down faster. And then these wag bags, they end up being double bagged, and you can just pack them out, and they can end up in a landfill, basically. So that's it. And you can find them, if you do a search, REI has them. You can just look for wag bags at REI.
Amazon, most local outfitters have them.
And that's one of those questions that when we worked at local outfitters and people are going out on trips, a lot of people don't know about it, and it's just kind of this last minute thing like, oh, what are you doing about waste? And it is pretty important because
there's a variety of other ways, but that's what we found to be the easiest to.
Yeah.
I admire and appreciate your openness. Thank you so much for answering all the questions. This was awesome. I can't wait. What was that, Michael?
I said we have an interpretive dance that we could do that addresses the subject, but maybe another time.
I think that maybe we should record that and include it in the follow-up. Well, thank you both so much. It was truly a pleasure. And Rebecca, I cannot wait to visit your gallery someday soon in the future. And Michael, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank
you
you
so much.
See you later, everybody.
Have a wonderful night.
Bye.